Introduction to Magic, Volume 1, Rituals and Practical Techniques for the Magus by Julius Evola and the Group. Commentaries on the Opus Magicum. The discourses by Luque and Leo included in this chapter outline the introduction to one of the first and fundamental operations in the initiatic art, the transferring of the sense of self into the region of the heart. In this context, the heart should not be understood as a physical reality, but sub specie interioritatis, from the inner point of view, and as the center of the human being. We add that, contrary to common opinion, according to the traditional teaching, everything that is mental, reflective, and cerebral must be referred to the lunar feminine passive element. Conversely, to the heart must be attributed the quality of the solar masculine and central element. In this regard, however, one should not think of what is commonly ascribed to the heart, sentimentality, passions, and so forth. The occult realization of the heart, or of one's self in the heart, has instead the meaning of an initial relation with a subtle or elementary aspect of reality. There are images that, being realized in a contemplative manner, naturally favor this translation of the sense of self, the indirect method. One can also try to carry out this translation directly, which will then be followed by the experience of a particular state, the direct method. Leo and Luque have discussed both of these ways. To these matters, I want to add a practice with which it is impossible to go further in this direction, and thanks to which many other disciplines will be greatly enhanced and vivified. This practice breaks down into two phases, namely, the moment that precedes falling asleep and the moment that follows waking up in the morning. First of all, one needs to dwell intensely on the following thought, that the so-called waking life of ordinary human beings is nothing but a state of torpor, of drunkenness and dullness, a state of fog and unreality. When the violent voices of the external world, the impressions and the stirring of the senses, the power of feelings, thoughts, and actions finally cease, and when the invisible occult hand of sleep suspends all this with a shroud of inner silence, then the way for inner growth is open, through the awakening and the powerful rising of the sun of knowledge and of reality. Unfortunately, in that precise moment we pass out and lose consciousness. Remembering all this during the evening, before falling asleep in a calm state, not being tired, having cleansed the mind of all worries, imagine through meditation to be at the foot of a mountain in the early hours of the morning, ready to begin the ascent. Slowly let the ascent begin, while the darkness fades away and the first light, then the sun, appears. You must continue to ascend, imagining the simultaneous rising of the sun in the sky, its growing, triumphant, expanding light shining over all things. Right at the moment when you feel you have reached the peak of the mountain, become aware that the sun has reached its zenith in the clear, bright sky. Contemplation needs to be stopped at this point as you recognize all this is a sense of that which will effectively happen within, beyond the threshold of sleep, until the middle of the night. Naturally, your ascent of the mountain and the rise of the sun from dawn to noon must be felt in a strict correlation. Everything must be experienced from an inner perspective as a progression of awakening. This process, once the top of the mountain is reached, must give rise to a sense of identification with the noon light, radiant, silent, pure in the boundless ether. In the morning, upon waking up, clear the mind from any residue of sleepiness and return through contemplation to the peak of the mountain, which is where you had remained. Slowly, head back to the valley below. In the meantime, the sun descends, sets, and every light will disappear by the time you reach the plain. This must be imagined and remembered as the meaning of the period between the middle of the night and the morning. In the darkness of the day, in which you find yourself when you awake, let the echo of the light from above or the echo of the midnight sun linger in the sensation that I am the bearer of this light that is now in your center, namely, in your heart. Then you will notice the new animated sense, according to which the light of the physical sun will appear when these disciplines are realized and lived. Also, you should notice and pay attention to any other new meaning that flashes in the midst of common perceptions. Besides mere imagining, try to really recall some of the impressions of that time in which, aside from dreams, consciousness is interrupted by sleep. Keep in mind, though, that wanting to remember pushes memories away. What needs to be done is to attract memory, invoking it without desire, loving it. For the same purpose, it is necessary to awaken from sleep spontaneously, not due to noises and much less due to the presence of somebody else in your room. The memory is also facilitated by a slight scent of musk, rose, or Florentine iris. One of the instruments of operative magic is the ability to fix a feeling, to realize it as an objective something, not connected by the reference to my physical body, as a state that I can posit outside of myself, in space, so to speak, without it ceasing to be a conscious event. Nothing can be done in operative magic without the capability to evoke, nourish, and then free oneself by inducing or projecting from a feeling or a thought. This skill is somewhat connected to the descent to the center of the earth, and thus to the seat of the heart. Another technical detail is in order. In order for any image to act in the way I'm talking about, it must be loved. It must be assumed in a greater inner calm and then warmed up, almost nourished with sweetness, without bringing the will or any effort into play, and much less without expectations. The Hermeticists called this agent sweet fire, fire that does not burn, and even fire of the lamp, since it really has an enlightening effect on the images. In addition to what Abraxas has written, I wish to emphasize 2 points. The first point is that along the path of high magic, there is no need, in following a discipline, to initially acknowledge the notions of good and evil in a moral sense. This may be necessary for a passive spirit in whom the functions of command is totally lacking. It is only because he does not find this function in himself that he seeks it elsewhere, wishing to be commanded. A being who is complete and integrated on the basis of being two, as Abraxas mentioned before, can create himself the power to command and the power to obey, which are both absolute. When what is lacking is not only the power to command, heavier to most men than any other burden, but also the power to obey, when this inability to obey of the inferior part takes over, usurping the rights of the superior power, only then one finds unruliness, laxity, and that false freedom which many mystics rightly recognize as one of the worst dangers on the path they follow. But this deviation should not be confused with the freedom of superior beings who know how to impose a law on themselves. Any discipline aimed at inducing the death of a certain part of one's will, and at awakening that in us which knows how to obey unconditionally, is an essential component of the magical path. The second point is that, especially for the operative aspects of magic, one needs to nourish a faculty definable in these terms: to be oneself beyond oneself, in the terms of an elan, an active self-overcoming, and an affirmation that situates itself beyond one's individuality. In everyday life, heroism, heroic and even orgiastic intoxication, the pleasure of risking one's life, and even certain times of readiness for sacrifice are already signs pointing in this direction. The power of a life free from itself, capable of going beyond itself in this active form, is as important to magical and theurgical practice as the principles of absolute command and absolute obedience, co-present in oneself. Those who are subject to the inner fetter of the self either will not be able to go beyond the limit, or will only overcome it at the cost of their own perdition. Abraxas has pointed out that in order for the mystical way to yield good results from an initiatic point of view, it is necessary at a certain point to effect a role reversal. This reversal applies to the state in which, once the duality is created, the divine image embodying the higher self stands before the mystic as another being. Interestingly, in Islamic esotericism, there is a technical term indicating this change. Shath. Shath literally means exchange of roles, and expresses the point in which the mystic absorbs the divine image so fully that he feels it as his own self, and feels his earlier self as something foreign. The divine image then speaks from him. In Islam, there are sure signs to recognize cases in which the shath has objectively occurred, as opposed to just being a matter of individual self-suggestion, e.g. the case of Ibn Arabi. However, we should warn that the esoteric truths that are experienced in this new condition must be kept secret, since they are dangerous for simple believers. Apparently, the death suffered by El-Hallaj, who is nevertheless regarded as one of the main teachers of esoteric Islam, Sufism, was due to the violation of this precept.